Welcome. We are so excited to have you with us today for Beyond Access, supporting persons who are deaf and hard of hearing with ADHD at work. My name is Amber Ham, and I'm the Training and Outreach Coordinator with Kentucky Spin. And I will be going over a few brief housekeeping items before we jump into today's presentation. So bear with me as we do this. On the first slide, we're going to talk just a little bit about Kentucky Spin and who we are. Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network is the Parent Training and Information Center, or PTI, for the state of Kentucky, funded by the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA since 1988, when Kentucky first received a PTI. Kentucky Spin Parent Center provides training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through 26 years old and beyond, as well as to their parents or caregivers, family members, and professionals that support them along their journey. And we will never turn anyone away at Kentucky Spin. We are here to support you. It's a little what's very important that we share what we do not do at Kentucky Spin, but we really want to focus on what we do to help support families. At Kentucky Spin, we are not attorneys, nor do we give legal advice or represent families in that manner. However, we empower families to advocate for themselves as well as their children effectively. And we do that by providing a peer-to-peer model of support that help family members, parents and caregivers, youth and young adults themselves to access needed information of resources and supports to help them in their success. A brief disclosure for today's training. This is not a training of trainers event, or known as TOT. Kentucky Spin does not authorize other agencies, organizations, or individuals to train this material. This presentation is for educational use only, and keeping all of this in mind, all rights are reserved for Kentucky Spin Incorporated. We are working virtually, so we do ask for grace as we go through today's presentation. We have fantastic staff on here to jump in at a second's notice if there were an internet disruption or maybe power outage. Anything and everything can happen. So we do ask for grace as we go along today. We will be providing links in the chat for access to the PowerPoint so that you can follow along in real time. If you're unable to grab any of the links that are provided to you today, no fear, we will email those out 24 hours in conclusion of today's webinar, so you will have access to those. There's also a link for closed caption with CART that has just been listed in the chat that is available, and you can follow along in real-time captions by clicking on the link provided to you. We do want you to ask questions today throughout this training. We do have time reserved at the end to go over those, but please feel free to utilize your Q&A box or the chat box with those questions, because we don't want you to forget them as we move along. And we'll make sure to get to those as soon as possible. We're so excited, and thank you again for being with us today. And now I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Eileen, and she's going to jump right in for the presentation.
Hooray! Hello, my name is Eileen Hoover. I am the early childhood parent educator here at Kentucky Spin. I have 4 children, 3 of whom are on the autism spectrum, and my 3rd child was actually born with a hearing disability and was wearing hearing aids and devices. And so through that, we were welcomed into like the deaf and hard of hearing community, and I learned so incredibly much. But I will say I am not the expert. I'm not the expert. This is not my lived experience. So I do say, turn back to the experts inside of your community to ensure that you are going back to the best place with the best resources. This is to try and give everyone a good overview about some of the things that this community who is twice affected encounter, and then ways that we can support and ways that we can help them support themselves, and so that way they can move forward. Um, so I am very casual and I'm a fast talker. So if anybody has any questions, really, please throw them in the chat. Also, if anybody has any sources or links that they really like, especially anybody in that DHH community that they really want, like find are wonderful, please throw those in the chat. Like, let this be an experience that we can all learn and see what resources are out there, because you don't know what you don't know. And I love learning new things. So these are our learning objectives. So hopefully we're going to be able to identify, how the DHH identity and the ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'm going to be using acronyms, but we try and put those acronyms in the chat as well to make sure that everyone has access to them. So how those intersect inside of the workplace settings, recognize those communication breakdowns as those primary barriers, apply executive function tools to real world employment situations, translate some of those supports that we've seen like through IEPs and 504s or individual education program into workplace accommodations, and how to coach individuals on disclosure, accommodation requests, and all of the wonderful sources that we do have incorporated to this presentation. So first, we're going to start off with attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD. So it is a neurodevelopmental condition. It affects how the brain regulates attention, organizes tasks, manages time, and controls impulses. It's often misinterpreted in workplace settings. It looks like things like procrastination, carelessness, disorganization, emotion reactivity, and inconsistency. But underneath all those types of behaviors are also these executive function barriers. So the brain struggles with regulation, not ability. In adults, ADHD may look different. Adults may be able to mask some of those challenges. Sometimes that also can look like overcompensating through overworking. Oh my God, right here. Internalizing shame. And sometimes you just don't understand why tasks feel harder than they should. When you layer that with deaf and the hard of hearing, that ADHD may be misattributed to a communication barrier alone. So our goal isn't going to be to fix ADHD. It's going to be that we build skills, we add structure, and then we can match the environment for that neurological need. Okay, so again, I am not the expert and I am only going to touch on a brief amount about what this really is. And again, I encourage you to talk to your clients, to your people in the community, to understand what barriers are and how to help them, so that way they can be a part of their community and be able to access just like everyone else. So ASL is a language. It is not signed English. American Sign Language, or ASL, has its own grammar and syntax and structure. It is not English with your hands. There's more than one visual language that's used in the United States, so not everything is ASL. There's also, and I'm probably going to get these wrong, but it's like signed English exactly, or I think it's SEE. And then there's also another one, cued speech, which is the sounds are represented through hand movements towards the face. So it's important to know not everything is ASL, and to make sure that you are asking and figuring out what is their preferred mode of communication. For many deaf individuals, though, English is a second language. So they learned ASL first, and then that English or the written language came second. So reading and writing may require additional processing for them. Written instructions may still need clarity and plain language. So just because somebody like they can read English, so the written instructions that should be enough. It may not always be. Written instructions are helpful, but the clarity and the structure matter. Um, Direct communication norms. Sometimes people interpret ASL communication to be more direct and efficient and clear. And it's very visually expressive with facial expressions, which is not always in other like spoken languages. That's not always the norm. So in hearing dominant workplaces, this can be misinterpreted as somebody being abrupt or blunt or even confrontational. If you add something like the ADHD, impulsivity, or emotional regulation challenges, that chance of having people have a misunderstanding can absolutely increase. Um, so, visual attention and cognitive load. Deaf individuals rely on visual information for language access, environmental awareness, social cues. So that means that they have to be visually attentive all the time. They cannot always, and not to say you cannot, but it can be presented with another set of difficulties about having a visually multitask and process a language that is a secondary language at the same time. Looking down to take notes can be misinterpreted as that they're trying to miss what's happening around them. So that sustained attention is already vulnerable. So the visual fatigue that gets compounded with ADHD, we just see how it's a twice affected community. And so what may look like somebody's inattention may actually be cognitive overload for them. Hearing dominance world. So most workplaces are structured for hearing norms. There's verbal announcements and there's quick hallway conversations. There's meetings that don't have captions. There's strictly phone-based communication. There's rapid unscheduled changes. So everyone has an advantage in the hearing world that the DHH individuals are going to have to find a way to adapt to those types of situations. And so when they're constantly having to adapt, it's going to put a drain on their executive function skills. It can increase stress. It's going to require ongoing self-advocacy. And so when we're talking about independence, we also have to recognize that extra labor that's required just to access information. And so we're going to touch on autism and the power dynamics. So, autism is the belief that hearing and speaking are superior. It kind of shows up in different places, like when the speaker is speaking to the interpreter instead of speaking to the person themselves. It's assuming that they're incompetent because they couldn't access information. It's expecting that everyone will be able to lip read. It's failing to provide interpreters. It's viewing accommodations as burdens. When you add something with like ADHD and some of the stigma around that, you're now having somebody that is navigating both the autism and their neurodivergence bias. So it's just one of those things that when we're looking at this community, that we want to make sure that we're not just addressing one, but we're addressing both of these. Um, so we really want to try and reframe things when we're looking at the workplace concerns. Is this a skill issue or is this an access issue? Is this ADHD that we're looking at? Is it cognitive fatigue from navigating between hearing norms and like what is it that we're looking at. So the goal is to, correctly identify what are the barriers so that way we know what we can do to intervene. And I apologize because I have so many things on my screen, so I can't, if I'm just going to I'm relying on my people to tell me if I need to stop or do something different.
You are
So
good to go.
Okay, so ADHD and DHH, the layered impact in the workplace. So when someone, we've just talked about it, when they're deaf or hard of hearing, we have to navigate the visual language processing, the communication, negotiation, the hearing dominant systems, cultural bias. And for many deaf individuals, the language access requires that visual focus. So if they look down to take notes, they may be missing signed information. If they're watching an interpreter, their working memory is already active. The information is traveling through a multiple processing steps for them, and that consumes a lot of that cognitive energy. On the executive function layer, ADHD impacts the brain's regulation system. So working memory may already be very limited, and the time perception might be inconsistent, and your task initiation may be difficult without having clear structure of how to make those first steps. So when your executive function and your communication demands collide together, it fatigues you very quickly. It kind of escalates because you're having not just one, but these two things that are compacting. So we've talked about this where it can look like that this is inattention, it's being emotionally reactive. It looks like disorganization, maybe slower transitions in between things. And so just taking into account that the cognitive overload is there, and that means also the burden of the self-advocacy to make sure that they are able to get their support also makes it harder and increases. Let's see. So we're going to go over executive function. This is not to say that if you have ADHD that you have executive dysfunction, but a lot of times executive function are the things that let me just start. Executive function is like your internal management system. So it's going to govern your planning, organizing, your starting, completing tasks. It's like a CEO in your brain. So it's going to coordinate your attention, your time, your emotional regulation, and it works best when it has structure. It's something that we don't have inherently. It's something that we learn these skills over time. We've broken this down into like eight. I've seen people break it down from three all the way up to 12. It just depends on what you want. I will say, like, again, this is like just a little snippet. And if any of these things kind of apply to you, does not mean that you automatically have something, but it could mean that maybe this is something that you could find something or a skill that might be building or something that's great. Like I'm terrible with time management, oh my God, and working memory. And so doesn't mean I have all of these, but that means I'm going to focus on those areas. So planning and prioritization. Planning is having that future-minded, that future-oriented thinking. It requires the brain to hold a goal in your mind, imagine next steps, put those steps in order, and then determine, how quickly do we need to get this done. For people who have ADHD, this process can feel overwhelming, especially when the tasks feel very abstract. So when a supervisor says, I need you to complete that report, that sounds very clear. I told him to complete the report. But for somebody who has planning challenges, the instruction is very broad. They don't maybe understand that what are those visible steps that the brain is going to experience the overload by not being able to piece apart things. And that overload looks like avoidance. It looks like, by not starting, by not getting things together, that you're just trying not to do your job, not that you feel so overwhelmed. So we, so what's important is that we want to try and avoid interpreting avoidance as like a lack of motivation. And we want to encourage milestone deadlines instead of maybe a final due date. So when it's working, it looks like you're able to set goals and break up large tasks and determine the order of what's important. And when it's not working is when you're having that trouble anticipating what that long-term consequence is going to be. It looks like avoidance because you're overloaded. So it's kind of like all these slides are set up. This is what it should look like. This is what it might look like for some people if it's not working out very well. And these are the skills that we can build. With these skills that we're talking about building and putting in there, these are suggestions. And if a plan doesn't work, we don't shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, we go, okay, that didn't work for me. What's the next plan that we can come up with? The visual tracker didn't do well because I don't look that way. So my visual tracker is now all on my phone because I need to make sure that I've got something there at all times. And we'll go into accommodations and how we can do that later, but just so you know. So, organization is about maintaining systems over time, not just creating them that one time. The ADHD brain often struggles with maintenance. So a system may work for a week and then collapse if they don't have that consistent structure. Clutter, physical or digital, I'm very called out in this moment, increases cognitive fatigue. So sometimes for some individuals who are reliant on their visual for their communication, that visual clutter could become more draining on them as more things to navigate. Organization is not always about neatness, it's about predictability. So small, consistent systems reduce executive strain dramatically. So keeping those systems in order, like this is even from like especially digital systems. I feel like my digital world is much more organized than my physical world, which explains a lot about me. But having a system of how they're going to be able to remember to do something or what works for them. Again, it's not a you need to make a schedule and that's how you'll stay organized. What works for this individual? What do they need? It's going to come back to becoming very person centered on what works and what didn't work so we can make a new plan that we can figure out how to move forward. Um, time management.
Eileen,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. I want to take just a moment if we could, because this is so much wonderful information. If we could pause for a moment and see if there's any questions anyone might have in the chat or in the Q&A area. Oh, and I love what was shared in the chat. Organization equals predictability is probably the best thing I've ever heard. Yes. And I need to organize myself so much. My OCD, I am a very structured person. And so when that is thrown off, it can affect greatly. And I think too with ADHD, but then also when you layer, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, the constant attention that you have to keep to just staying organized, right? Organizing your thoughts, taking in what everyone's saying. So I'm not seeing any questions for a moment, but please feel free to reach out on there and let us know if you have any questions or would like to share. I hear you. We've got some in the comments here. You're speaking a lot about visual strategies. I work with Rehabilitation Center for the Blind, and we see an increasing number of deaf-blind individuals, many whom are losing vision. And I'm so thankful that you brought that up. And again, everybody's different, but in our family, and my brother is legally blind, and that could affect a great deal of him being able to access, because our world is not set up if you are deaf or hard of hearing and blind, and if you have both. And so really looking at what are some things that can be put into place. Is it going to be some technology tactile things that we can do. What is going to help them be able to be successful but have the support? Our world many times is not set up to be successful if you have one disability. But when you have multiple, and my brother Grant, which he shares with everybody, and is a strong self advocate, has cerebral palsy, but then also is legally blind. So our world is not set up, and there are not the traditional things if you're legally blind that would work for him, right? Because they kind of fight against one another, if that makes sense. So most people think that Braille would work all of that, but with his physical disability, that wouldn't work, right? And so when we look at in our community and the workforce, when you are deaf or hard of hearing, but then also have visual impairments or are blind, that can have a great effect on you being able to be successful. And one of the things, too, I'd like to share, and I don't know if many of you are familiar with the Kentucky Deaf Blind Project, especially for school-age children. There are a lot of resources. And when I hand it back over to Eileen, I didn't mean to take over, Eileen. But there are so many great resources out there and technologies that really, even knowing about them, most persons with disabilities don't know, and having the access to it, because not all of us have the answers, or we don't have the lived experience. And so how do we all partner? This is a wonderful opportunity with all of us on here, partner together so that everyone can be successful. One other thing, tips to identify traits in ourselves and other colleagues in a way that allows us to adjust accordingly. So that is a great question. As a person who has a disability, but then also other people too, especially if they have not disclosed to you that they have a disability, you know, a lot of it is at Kentucky STEM, we're very open. We share all of that with one another because that is the work we do, right? Is we are peer support. But there is that balance to where, is it appropriate that you're adjusting, right? Or you're doing something. And so there are almost those boundaries, and it has to do with the self-advocacy of the individual, because a lot of people have great intentions and are trying to be helpful. It's almost like any workplace that you go into, right? Whether you have a disability or not, everybody has amazing talents. And my OCD, one of my greatest talents is I am very concise and organized. And the more complicated it is, that it has a very strict process, I thrive in those environments, right? I complement one another, you know, with some of our other people because they thrive in others. So a lot of it is not so different than how you would do in life within your family, how you complement one another. But we know our strengths, we know the areas that we struggle in, and we support one another. So I hope that kind of helped. And Eileen, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Rhonda. I will say we do talk in some later slides about disclosure, because that is also a very important part of, if you can't help yourself unless you recognize that there's an issue. This is hopefully going to help you see if that is an issue for you, in that not working, if it feels like this is what maybe disorganization feels like and what it looks like for you, and that our goal is to try and help you show, like, these are the skills to build, so that helps you with your organization, so that it doesn't feel like you're having trouble categorizing and sorting stuff. It is a self-reflection thing. And as far as like having your colleagues, we do have a handout just about executive function in general, which happens to be a lot of what ADHD is, a lot of executive dysfunction a lot of times. I feel like hand it out. No, but like just as a way to have people start doing that introspection and to look into outside themselves. But looking at this from an OVR stance, I always look at, what do I need to do to help this individual? I'm looking for them to introspect to see what are the barriers that they see so that way they can figure out how we can help figure out together how are we going to come over this? Are we going to build a skill? Do we need to make a structure around them? Do we need to do education? What is it? So that way it stays person centered about making sure that individual can be as independent as they possibly can be. Okay. So, time management. Whew, I struggle with this one. Time management in ADHD is strongly affected by time blindness. So that means that the person may not internally feel the passage of time accurately. They may genuinely believe they have more time than they do. Oh God, this slide was, I wrote this for me. This was like a little come to me. Um, they may genuinely believe that they have more time than they do, and you may also hyper focus and lose track of time completely. It's neurological, it's not being irresponsible. The solution is going to be externalizing that time. It's going to be making those visible calendars. Is it having a countdown timer? I know I use my phone a ton for those types of activities, and I have younger children, so we have visual timers around the house because children struggle with this concept, just like their parents sometimes do. Um, so doing check-ins during midpoint. So if somebody isn't sure, like you have an hour to get something done, do we need to check in at 30 minutes? So that way, hey, how are we doing? Are we still progressing? This is how much time you have left. So we need to coach individuals on stop trying to rely on our internal time systems because our internal time systems sometimes don't work that well. And so if something doesn't work well inside of your brain, then make it tangible, make it physical, make it something you can see or hear.
Eileen,
So
we just had a comment in the chat, and I just wanted to hop on real quick. Someone said tactile timers are wonderful, buzzing in your pocket or on your wrist, etc.
love that. Love, love, love that. And I mean, this is where we'll talk later about accessibility and things like that, but there's so many amazing things out there. And I know there was a mention about having, deaf and blind becoming affected. And there are suggestions in this presentation that will say things that if they don't necessarily apply to you, it's going to be how are we going to adapt this idea or this concept into what's going to work for the individual. That's the goal is that we're just trying to figure out like we see the barrier, what are we going to do to help? So with the time management, we should be able to estimate how long something takes, use our time effectively and monitor deadlines. But it's going to feel like a lot of times that you're chronically late, that I underestimate the amount of effort that is required to get something done, um, overcommitting, doing last minute rushes. I say that I am an optimist because I think I can do more with my time than is physically possible. But because I can recognize that within myself, this is where I have a lot of visual things around my house and a lot of timers at all times. Like my watch is currently charging, but like my Apple Watch is my everything because it tells me where my phone is. And then it really keeps me on track because those reminders that happen throughout the day. And that's how I stay on task. So that's what works for me. Again, you want to use these and see what's going to work for yourself or the individual that you're working with. So next up, we're going to do task initiation. It's very misunderstood as just being procrastination. In ADHD, starting is very hard. And sometimes those barriers can feel like that there's no clear first step, that there's a fear that you're going to do something wrong or imperfectly, feeling overwhelmed because you don't feel like there's clear expectations of what the task is or how you're going to start it. If those expectations of what the task is are very vague, if the brain just freezes. Um, so what we want to do is like we want to be able to overcome that perfection paralysis, and we want to try and coach into saying, what is the smallest thing that I can do to start this thing? Like, is it just I'm going to get the piece of paper and the pen in my hand to at least start this? And while we say, wow, that's a really small thing, maybe that's what we need is those very small and explicit instructions to feel like we can get something started. Um, you know, there's the 2 minute rule where you are going to start and you will work for 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, you can stop if you want to stop, or if you want to keep going, you can keep going. And sometimes knowing that you have the ability to stop at any time, like once this is done, can give you enough motivation to continue and start moving forward. Um, Having structured start times on a calendar is incredibly effective. So knowing that I'm going to block off this time because I'm going to focus on this one particular item, and I'm going to only do a small part of it. I'm just going to start it. I'm just going to gather my items. I'm just going to make an outline. Like making those tasks feel like it's something that you can digest, something that you could handle. Because when things are very big and overwhelming, you know, where do you start? And then you don't start at all. And so I always say there's a shame spiral with this where you didn't start because you were overwhelmed, and because you were overwhelmed and you didn't start, you feel bad, and then you feel bad, so you don't want to start. And so you can get into this very negative self-think and self-talk. And so it's important to say, like, pulling it into that positive, like, what's one thing I can do? Um, One of the suggestions for skills to build is body doubling, which I love. Having somebody else in the same room, in the same workspace, that is knowing that we're both going to be doing this together, having that other person there can help people start a task. And they even now have teachers I see use this a lot. They have on YouTube different timers where somebody is going to be working on their homework and they're only going to work for the next hour. And so they just film themselves working, and teachers will play that on a screen. And that is enough to feel like they're working. So I can start working, and it helps kids. It also helps adults too. As I work virtually, I sometimes need an extra person in the room, and that is helpful. So, again, finding what works for those individuals and what that's going to look like in whatever their situation is. Obviously, not everybody's virtual, but there's lots of things. Um, so,
Eileen, I did want to just hop in real quick. We've got some peer-to-peer commenting going on, and someone has suggested what they've utilized is everything on their schedule buzzes as a reminder 15 minutes beforehand. Um, I am so sorry. My chat just went away. So everything on their schedule buzzes as a reminder 15 minutes beforehand to their watch. Otherwise, they'll lock in on something and lose all sense of time. So they're definitely agreeing with things that are rolling in. Someone said, this makes me think of a song with Lauryn Hill, Killing Me Softly. Why do you ask? Laugh out loud. You have read me like a book. I identify so much with a lot of the things with ADHD. Thanks for sharing. And then someone said shame spiraling might be the second best thing I have ever heard. I fully connect with that. So very much appreciated.
well, hooray. Um, like I said, if you identify with anything, it's one of those, not that you have ADHD, but hey, these are things that you can work on now that you can identify it within yourself. Um, okay, so self-control. This one's kind of hard sometimes. So, emotional regulation is frequently overlooked in workplace conversations. ADHD can lower frustration tolerance. So, when you have a very high cognitive load, especially for somebody that's navigating communication barriers, emotional responses may surface more quickly. Um, it's not that they're immature, it could be that they're just overloaded. Um, It's hard because, emotional regulation is not something that we necessarily teach, but we can teach the skills of what we need to do to make sure that we're all being safe in situations. So having self-control is like where you can pause before reacting, you can regulate your emotional responses, you can resist distractions. But sometimes when it's not working, it feels like you have a lot of frustration when you're under any kind of stress. The emotional overwhelm and sometimes leading to shutdown. Reactive to having any type of feedback could be interrupting others, not letting others get everything out because you cannot, take that breath. Um, I probably will be working on this for my entire life, but we can teach those skills like having that pause before responding. Like never say the first thing. The first thing, say that, girl, lock it in the brain. Those first responses, lock it up because we want to be able to take a breath. And even if it's not their first reaction, it's going to be a skill that we need to build. And that takes time. It takes explicit instruction. It's going to take a lot of reminders. It's not something we're going to say, hey, you need to chill before you say something. Yeah, I wish that worked. It's going to be taking the time, giving those mindfulness tips, working on having structured feedback conversations about how to receive that feedback from other people, and how to accept it and how to say, thank you and move on so that we don't have those reactions. But it is not something, I think this is one of the hardest ones because regulating your own emotions is so difficult for some people. And then to have so many other barriers on top of it, it's like, it's easy to see why some people are so easily that their cup overflows and they get to that point. So it's going to be teaching mindfulness. It's going to be finding a quiet space for regulation. And if that means, like, I know we're talking about the DHH community, we do talk about having specific breaks for when we take hearing aids out, take off our devices and or your devices and have specific times that we are not going to be interrupted so that way we do have a way to focus and be mindful and to do those things. It's not being selfish. It's about being able to trying to think how to say this because it's so hard. This one's, I said, I struggle with this one because you just want to make sure that we're layering in that ADHD and the DHH community barriers that they have, that there's a lot of chance for misunderstandings to arise. And so if we're building up scripts and self-advocacy skills to help protect them and help promote the professionalism that they need inside of the workplace. Okay. Next up, we're going to do attention and focus. So, sustained attention requires energy. For deaf individuals, the visual vigilance is already very demanding. When we add ADHD, the attention becomes that much more fragile. So, certain areas, certain environments can be significantly more distracting, and interruptions are particularly disruptive for ADHD brains. So when it's working, when we're seeing what it's supposed to look like, it should be being able to stay on task, resisting distractions, returning to a task after having a disruption, completing tasks on time. But it sometimes feels like that you're very easily distracted, that you're missing important details, that you don't complete your tasks, that maybe you're switching from one task to another um, without finishing the first task. So when we're talking about those skills to build, we want to reduce distractions both visually and auditorily. This again is where we talk about having breaks, hearing breaks, throughout the day and making sure people know, like, hey, I'm not answering calls at this time. I am scheduling my focus hour. I am taking my, my break and making sure that I'm ready to come down and get rid of all of my distractions. What does that look like? And so looking at these things as regulation tools, and that the breaks that you're doing isn't avoiding work, it's getting ready, it's getting yourself mentally prepared to start the task at hand. And to do so, I need to have 15 minutes to make sure that I get all of my other things done. I went to the bathroom, I got a sip of water, I took 5 minutes, I checked my email. So now I'm ready to focus on this task at hand. So what does that look like in their workplace? And then what is it that you need to do to make sure that we're getting rid of those distractions? We talked about visual clutter. I really need to clean up this desk. We talk about visual clutter, is it that we say during this time, I'm going to put the blinders on to certain areas. I'm going to reduce the distractions. I'm going to take my phone, oh girl, take my phone and put it in another room because I know if I hear that ding, I'm going to pick it up. But you know what? I need to focus. And since I know this is a distraction, I can recognize it. I'm going to do something about it, recognize the barrier, and then come up with a solution. Um, and there's a lot of really great things out there, like the timers and things like that, that can be very helpful to the body doubling and some other things. And you'll see that there's not like one set of solutions. Like the things that work for attention and focus can also work for, working memory, can also work for other things. So you'll see that a lot of them are interconnected. Um, and just know that use what works for you. So working memory is the brain's temporary holding space. In ADHD, working memory capacity is reduced, especially under stress. So if you have instructions that are multiple steps, if there's verbal only instructions, if they're delivered very quickly, like if somebody's saying very quickly to do something and you missed it, or if you doesn't stuck in there, um, if the information is more likely to be lost. So it's especially true when there's maybe an interpretation delay might be involved. If the written recap emails are not those optional supports, they're protective structures to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. So we want to try and encourage individuals that if their working memory, like we said, if your working memory or your brain can't take time or can't hold things very well, make it physical, make it tangible, make it something that's out there. So if I can't remember every little detail, I'm going to make sure that I get a written write up afterwards. I'm going to have a recap done. I'm going to use, whatever the functions are out there because I can't trust my own memory because I know sometimes it's not the best. So if I can't do that, we're going to use note taking, the checklist, those visual reminders. Again, it's all stuff that we kind of almost talked about before because it works for multiple parts of executive function, building skills. Um, so processing, in general, the processing chain increases the risk for informational loss. So we do this also with the advocacy about requesting those accommodations like, hey, thank you for saying that. Can you put that in writing? I need that written down. I need that, however, the form of communication or the form that you need. So that way you can access the information and hold on to it and be able to use it just like everyone else. And so the last step is going to be flexible thinking. Flexible thinking is the ability to shift gears. ADHD brains often struggle with rapid transitions, and sudden priority changes can cause people to feel more stressed out, can decrease productivity, can elicit emotional responses. It's a barrier that's not always like an unwillingness to not want to do something. Sometimes it's that they're having trouble doing that neurological shift in their brain. And it's something I think of this one as also kind of difficult because I, as I was making this, I was like, the thing that I hate the most is that the skill to build is to tolerate uncertainty. Now, I'm a type C person where I'm like super A type about some things, but my house is a complete wreck. And so I really don't do well with uncertainty. Like when I don't know what's going on, I want to stand up and start organizing people. And sometimes like just saying like it's okay, like other people's ways are okay too. And just being able to sit there and not that you enjoy it, but tolerating it is a way that you can start stretching that kind of mindset because it is difficult because this is something you have to recognize within yourself. But then it's also about being able to like if I don't do really well with flexible thinking, I'm going to have multiple plans to try and make sure that I am ready for other situations. I think of it again, I have younger children, so the toddlers, they're not very flexible in their thinking. They're very rigid and very straight. And like, what are the strategies that I'm using with my toddler to help them in those transition times, the areas that we see that they have trouble? And then I mean, really scale up what we're doing because it's not that those skills that we have taught when they were younger, like those skills are still valid. What is it that we need to do? Okay, you really struggle with using that transition. So we need to put things on a plan. Maybe we'll have a backup plan. Maybe we'll have other things. And then I'm going to let Amber talk.
Well, hi, Eileen. We had a question roll through. What suggestions do you have for the DHH staff who do not read well? And you are on mute.
Mute. There we go. Wow, it did not want me to talk. I like this is where I am not the expert. I cannot claim to be the expert. I really say divert back to the experts within your own community, whether that's like I think we had posted some in the chat with like KSD, the Kentucky School for the Deaf, and Kentucky Hands of Voices, and some other ones that they have other solutions and things because again, this is like the briefest because this is such a complex thing. And I don't want to say like, oh, just slap a sticky note on it because that's not acceptable. I see Rhonda also came on camera. I didn't know if she wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, I think something that's I think really important because for many people struggle with reading, right? And so we can't rely on that always to be able to help. So one of the things I think would be very important, a lot of things that Eileen is going through here about the skill building, all of that. Not advertising Kentucky Spin, but a lot of our trainings are closed captioned. A lot, and so those are available and they're recorded webinars, but we do short video versions of the infographics, whereas now we're a work in progress getting our dream is to have all of them or pretty much all of them to where there's a video version. But if there's a video version of it, those are accurately closed captions. So how are we individualizing it to where they can learn? Well, and what you're bringing up too is because if they don't read very well, and one of the things looking at individually working with the person so that they can hands-on do it, right? So it may be having that direct support because I just realized what you said there. So I was giving you an option of something. You'll have to ignore me. Of something that would not help with the closed captioning. So how do we do it with the hands-on approach? And where we can have those supports where being able to practice it can build those skills. So if we can't learn from reading it or getting the directions like that, do we need some supported employment opportunities? Where are we going to get that support to where it fits the individual needs of the client, right? And I think those are going to be some critical things, knowing the individuals, what works best for them. But honestly, we come up with so many ideas we think are going to work, right? And but have we asked the person? Have we asked the person what is going to help them learn best, right? They may struggle in the reading. Sometimes they're not sure, but we can help them get to what works. And another thing too, if your life's anything like mine, most things I try the first time do not work, but I learn something. The same goes for my brother. Him being able to access and looking at the different things. So again, there's not going to be one blanket answer. And just like Eileen said about accessing, what supports are out there specific for different disabilities for deaf and hard of hearing individuals that could possibly help. What assistive technology might be there? So that would be a prompt to sort of investigate and dig a little bit deeper. I don't know if that helps there or not.
I mean, I think you kind of said it though, Rhonda, that it's a this and the whatever that they gave, like if it was closed captioning, but they can't read English because it's a secondary language, or maybe they can't read, that's not an acceptable, like what's the next step? Is it that we do we need to figure out, do we need to teach English? Do we need to figure out a different way to get that information to them? It's not again, it's not a do this and it's going to fix it. It's going to be this worked. Awesome. We're going to keep doing it. This didn't work. Okay. Why didn't it work? What part? Because this person doesn't read. This person doesn't. My husband's colorblind. He does all sorts of things with his work. And they're like, what about the blue one? And he's like, I can't tell you what he's doing. So they had to switch to saying, well, we can't use colors anymore. We're going to use dots and hashes to differentiate between different things. So it's about looking at the barrier that you may have, seeing what could work, and then trying it. And if it doesn't work, again, awesome. Noted, moving on to the next plan. Let's go. Because I always say, like, life isn't happening like at somebody, like we're participating in it. We want this person or whoever is being affected to be participating and working collaboratively. Like, that's our hope, is that we're collaboratively working with this person to figure out their barriers so that way we can help them build the skills, find the accommodations, do the advocacy. What is it going to do so that they can live their most independent lives, so that they can access just like everybody else can. Okay. So kind of leads us right into our next thing. So promoting autonomy and self-determination. Autonomy does not mean figuring out alone. It means understanding your needs, knowing your rights, and being able to advocate for them. For individuals who are DHH and have ADHD, self-determination means that they have to manage layered barriers. It's not just, making a singular choice. Self-awareness is foundational. Again, it's that introspection. The individuals have to understand which of maybe the executive function skills are working well, what's a strength that they have in them, which ones need more structure, which ones need to be built up. You have to be aware of how their communication is going to impact their potential performance. What environments increase or decrease their stress. Because if you do not have awareness, then you can't really advocate for what it is that you need. With awareness, that advocacy becomes something that you can find specific things that you can then advocate for and move forward with. So knowing your rights and expectations of self-determination requires that you have understanding of what is considered a reasonable accommodation, that your disclosure is voluntary, and that retaliation is prohibited. One of the things is that when you know more because you don't know what you don't know. And so You want to identify what are effective supports. It's not enough to just say, yep, I struggle with this. We need to know, okay, I struggle with this because I have time blindness. I can't see color. I can't hear all of the announcements that are coming in when they're just shouting them because I have a disability or whatever that is. So you need to know what are the tools that are going to help overcome those barriers? How are they going to use it? It's something to say that you can make a really great plan, but if they're not going to use that, it's like you didn't do anything at all. And that's where having that introspection and self-determination that this isn't something that's happening at somebody, we need them to be participating with it to figure out and to come up with solutions. Um, so also when to request those types of accommodations, how to explain to other people what they are. So sometimes we have things that are already at our disposal, like we have IEPs and 504s that have been made within the school system, that some of those accommodations that they've been doing all along, and to see whether or not the individual knows what those accommodations are and how to advocate for them for themselves. Um, so communicating strategically is also it's all going to be important, but you need to make sure that self-determination is not an emotional reaction, that it is a strategic communication. Again, that goes back into executive function and whether or not if we know that's a barrier, maybe we need to practice a whole bunch of scripts about how you're going to ask for an accommodation before going to the workplace. Um, Ownership and follow through. So making sure that we use those supports consistently, that they are showing up prepared because, there's a difference between um, being like is it an ability, is it a skill, or is it due to the disability that there's a barrier? Like, what is it that we're looking at that we need to help build? Being able to monitor progress, like, do you have a way to look back and say, hey, this is totally working, or oh my God, this is a complete disaster. We need to come up with a new plan. And that's part of the thing where you're going to be adjusting things when it's not working. Um, Accommodations are just tools that we are able to use. They're not guarantees that something's going to work or it's going to work every time. It's still something that the person that's needing that still needs to actively engage to make sure that they're able to receive the supports that they need. And so that way they can be, you know, independent and do all of the things. Um, so with with asking for reasonable accommodations, and we're using that word very specifically because that's how it's written into the laws that you can have reasonable accommodations. Um, that there's places that determine where they are and who decides those. So the way it works is that the employer and the employee have to engage in a conversation to determine what is considered like an appropriate accommodation. This is not where the employer just says yes or no and they're doing it by themselves. It is not the employee showing up and say, I'm demanding that you do this. It is a problem solving process. It is something that you're going to have to work together. Um, so there's a lot of things that are already out there that people can use, like in their everyday that maybe they don't realize are accommodations or could be considered accommodations, like written instructions, having structured deadlines, having different task lists. Oh my goodness, excuse me. So some people think like accommodations are giving special treatment, but accommodations are just providing equal access to the people that need it. So JAN, which is the Job Accommodation Network, is a really great site and gives a ton of scenarios that you can think of for what a reasonable accommodation would be due to the and what is considered an undue hardship, which we'll talk about in a second here. Um, Like I said, I can't come up with every scenario, but Jan really did try to. And it's really helpful that they have a ton of great links that you go through there to see, like, it may not be your exact scenario, but it can definitely help guide you to show what's out there, what's been done, and what maybe something that you could use in your own life or inside of your workplace. So, ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, it extends protections beyond the federally funded or beyond federally funded entities. So, Title I of the ADA covers employment. So, it applies to employers who have 15 or more employees. So this says that employers must provide reasonable accommodations unless doing so creates undue hardship. And the undue hardship is something that, again, I am not the expert in what's undue hardship and what's not. And this is where we linked everything here. But going back to the ADA site, going back to Jan, and going back to those places that deal with what undue hardship is, how it's defined and what is considered it, because that's where you want to go back to kind of look and research to see whether or not something is or isn't. Um, so reasonable accommodations doesn't mean like anybody's lowering standards. It's just a way for somebody to, again, to access. It means maybe you might have to adjust the environment, maybe adjust the process of what they're doing, but it's just so that that individual has the opportunity. Um, ADHD is recognized as a disability if it substantially limits one or more of the following like major life activities. And so this is where major life activities is huge. If you've ever been to our Bridging the Gap, we have a slide and it's just covered with stuff because major life activity could be concentrating, thinking, communicating, working. Executive functioning challenges fall under these protections when they significantly impact the person to be able to function. This is important because ADHD is often just like, oh, everyone has ADHD. And so to be able to see what it is, where those protections are, and how you can advocate for yourself to have those reasonable accommodations is important. For Section 504, that applies to any organization receiving federal funding. So we tend to hear 504 a lot with public schools and public agencies, government funded employers. So that's going to state that individuals with disabilities cannot be excluded or discriminated against because they have a disability. So if anybody receives federal money, they have to provide equal access. Um, when you have that ADHD and the DHH community intersect, the protections are going to apply to both of those standards. So the communication access is protected with having the interpreters or captioning or written follow-up, but also that ADHD and some of those executive function supports like requesting deadlines, written instructions, having a workplace free of certain distractions at points. Those can both fall under like reasonable accommodations if they're necessary for equal access. And again, this is where we get into keep referring back to like experts, but um, a lot of the times employers they misinterpret that those accommodations, like the accommodations as like a favoritism, but that's not what it is. The law is saying that accommodations just make the playing field level for everybody. They don't give anybody an advantage. It's not being unfair. Um, it's just to make sure everyone has access. I'm gonna let Rhonda talk.
Well, and and I just wanted to point out too that hearing is a major life activity, so that automatically under ADA and Section 504, if the employer receives any type of federal funding for 504, you're covered under both of those. So those are some very clear examples to where reasonable accommodations, and a lot of times you'll experience with employers, the understanding the undue hardship, right? And making sure, a lot of people automatically think when you need an accommodation or advocating for accommodation for yourself, that means they're going to be out tons of money, right? It could be something very simple that isn't going to cost money. Now, yes, there might be some instances where it might, but really looking at having those conversations and figuring it out together, right? Because there is not, to my knowledge, completely in ADA or Section 504, you cannot get this or you don't, right? It goes by the definition of undue hardship in reasonable accommodations. So really thinking outside the box many times is where we're going to be successful and get that individualized support so employees can be successful. And honestly, many of the things that Eileen has went through and talked through here that would help someone who is deaf or hard of hearing and also has ADHD, it's going to help your other employees too. As an employer, we have great experience in this, helps everybody. Having that, I'll use the example, the written follow-up. Okay, how many of you all, and you all can use your emojis, how many of you all have been in a meeting and you understood something one way, someone else understood something in another way? Has anyone ever experienced that? Show me some emojis if you have. Okay. And sometimes I'm like, was I not in the same meeting? We're all people. We understand things in a different way, right? So that written follow-up, yes, it might help greatly for an individual who is deaf or hard of hearing, just so that we have that clear instructions, because we couldn't hear the instructions, right? And so we may have missed some of that. Well, even for your employees that may hear it, they may not understand it the same way. So as an employer, it's almost like what we have to do is, as persons with disabilities and families, we have to constantly sell ourselves, right? And that's just the world we live in, right? And so how do we show how the benefits of it, right? Show the positive. Because automatically what people think is, oh, we're going to have to do all this different work, right? Or this is going to cost a lot of money. Well, it's all in how you frame it. And no, everybody can't do everything. And we understand employers have limited resources, but how then do we work in individuals? A lot of it is going to fall on how we frame it as an individual with a disability working with the employer. And I think that will help greatly. But it has benefits way beyond just for that one employee. And a lot of times I think reminding people of that and how it could help across the board is really going to make a difference for persons with disabilities.
No, I agreed. I love me a follow-up because I do that a lot where I'm like, I had a really great meeting. They're like, oh, it was really tough. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I don't think I was a part of that meeting like you were, but okay. Um, so come on, computer. There it goes. Okay. So I talked briefly about IEPs or individualized education programs and 504 plans. Um, they're not just like compliance documents. They were like sitting around as like a blueprint for how we were going to access things. And many people did not realize that those supports that help them in school are transferable into the workplace. Now, it's not that you're going to have a workplace that has an IEP because it's not educational, it's not for school, but the accommodations that you had used there could definitely be something that could be helpful or utilized in another way or changed inside of the workplace. So when working with an individual, you want to ask about like what helped them succeed when they were in school. Was it that they got extra time? Did they have visual timers? Did they have assignments being broken into parts? I'm muted. Who, me?
I'm no, I'm so sorry, Eileen. Go ahead. It was an attendee checking. I apologize.
It's like, oh no, I'm talking to nobody. Again, I'm in my own world. Um, sorry, that's my own ADHD. I saw a squirrel and I ran towards it. So ex- the time, extra time that you had inside of your day, like did they have extra time for completing assignments or for tests or things like that? Did we break assignments into smaller pieces? Were there check-ins with a teacher or a guidance counselor every week or something along that? Like, because those are sorts of executive function supports that were there. And just because you needed those then does not mean that they have to disappear after they graduate. The environment that they're in is changing, but those neurological needs are not. So, what do we need to do? We need to translate, don't replicate. So we're not recreating school inside of the workplace. Like that's school to school, work looks different. We're going to translate the structure of what we did inside of the schools or what they have done that was successful and see how we can transfer them into the workplace. So if you had extended time in school, does that mean that you have milestone deadlines instead of just one big final due date? So that way things are broken up for you a little bit more. If chunking was one of the things you had, does it become that the project or things you do comes in phases? Do we have task breakdowns? Um, if you had visual schedules, is it that we have, planners that we're all on the same, like for us at Kentucky Spin, we're all looking at each other's calendars so I can see what's going on and what's happening. Is it that we're all on the same task at the same time? Like, what does that look like? Is it that they need their own digital planner, or is it something that, again, we're not great with keeping things in mind? Do we need to have something in paper or something we can touch? If there were teacher check-ins, well, in the workplace, can you have supervisor meetings? Can we have things about, hey, having check-ins with what's working well? Are you having any struggles? Can we have these once a month, once a week? What is it that's going to work with that individual? So that way they can make sure that everyone's on the same page. Um, the goal is going to be making this, adult appropriate structure and not the making it like the infantilization. I can say it. We're not trying to treat them like babies. We're not trying to make their work easier for them. We're just trying to make sure that they're able to access it. But we already had a blueprint of what kind of worked before. Let's not just let that go. Um, so the language that you use when you are talking to employers is going to matter. Employers may resist if they hear like this person needs special accommodations, but we can work on coaching people when they're advocating for themselves. Like, I work best with clear phases and I really appreciate weekly follow-ups. And so that sounds very, very easy and accommodating. I just realized I'm missing an earring. Cool. Um, I'm so ADHD myself. I apologize. Um, so for that's about being professional. So if you also have DHH and ADHD, you're going to say that you're going to need to have things provided like communication access, maybe the structured deadlines, the check-ins, the visual tools. So as we see those decline in adulthood, we can see performance also decline. So again, this is just recognizing that this is another structure, something else that we can take and bring, that this is another accommodation that's available, and not to just throw away those IEPs when when you're done with them.
Oh, we popped on at the same time. I just wanted to make sure and share a response that was in the chat about being cognizant of those practical strategies that they're working on in school. And others have also agreed that they're far from that school age. And so that wasn't even something that was taken into consideration. So bringing kind of a spotlight to that. What practical strategies are available to help support in the workforce?
Yeah, and I think too, and I'm glad that was brought up there, and I see that Kelly had chimed in there as well, is that one thing that's really critical and something that we worked very hard with is, and again, this is for students who are still in school and they have an IEP or 504 plan. And like Kelly had said in the chat, that it's so important for them to be an active member of the team. This is for them. Their voice needs to be heard, and they need to understand the accommodations, those practical strategies, because those are going to feed over into adulthood in all areas of their life. And so really that self-advocacy piece of it, the practicing, that supported decision making, are going to be very critical, you know, for them to be successful into the workplace. And so what if they're not in school anymore, or it's been a long time since they were in school? One way to approach it is, and I know this is regarding employment, but finding out what strategies they use for daily life, right? What are some of the things that they are using in their life outside of employment? Because what's working in that area can also feed over into employment, right? So sometimes it's working and providing those supports to see where it can translate into another area of their life. Sometimes they may not have the supports and are not thriving with their daily living skills, right? So there may be instances where we need to work to build those and really connect them. And if it's not within what you do or able to provide, how can we connect them with the resources that may be able to build those skills? So again, it's very individualized. But I love that you shared, Eileen, here, how very simply things that were in the IEP or 504 plan can help you be successful in the workplace, right? Those don't carry on into employment, but certainly those accommodations, those strategies could be a great deal benefit to them. So, well, and looking too, and I'm so thankful that you all shared here in the chat a lot of, and if anyone else, the different things I love that you all are sharing, if there's things that you all realize that's helped, please put it in the chat because we learn from one another.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you. Okay. We're going to keep moving through. So, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, this is the federal agency that is responsible for enforcing employment discrimination laws, including the ADA. It's not just a complaint agency. It also can provide guidance documents to help employers understand what their responsibilities are. So it's a lot of the things like that we were talking about before with that it's an interactive process between the employee and the employer talking together to figure out what is it that they need. And then also with it comes to undue hardship, this is one of the other places that you're going to go to because this is the government saying, this is what we consider undue hardship. So when there is issues like that and they arise, we just want to make sure that you know this is the place that you go back to with questions when you gets to that level. Our goal is that we never have to get there. Our goal is that we're able to have a collaborative communication with all parties involved, and that way we can move forward because that is the goal, is being able to advocate and be able to live independently. So that's just that's my quick one on that because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I'm going to leave that for them. So disclosure. Disclosure is voluntary. There is no legal requirement to disclose a disability unless the individual is requesting an accommodation. Many people fear disclosure because there is stigma, there is bias, there is fear of being considered or perceived as incapable. There's previous negative experiences that they've had. And so when it comes to disclosing, we just want to make sure that we're helping everybody approach disclosure strategically and not emotionally. Because it's not about labeling yourself. It's about trying to find a way to create access. And so you're able to meet expectations. So when you frame it professionally and strategically, it can help strengthen their independence because it's about the function, not the diagnosis. So you don't have to say, oh, I have ADHD. I say that a lot, but that's just because that's who I am. You don't have to. But you can say, I work best with instructions that are provided in writing. I benefit from deadlines with check-ins during our milestones. It's going to be a workplace conversation that's going to be focusing on how you can optimize your performance, and not necessarily going into a medical explanation about who you are and everything that's happened to you, because it's none of their business. And that's one of the things that's important to know is that, again, disclosure is voluntary. You do not have to give all the ins and outs, but you do need to let them know what is it going to take so that way you are able to have those reasonable accommodations, and it may be brought into the conversation. I would suggest honestly doing that introspection before we're going to disclosure, so that way we know what are we comfortable with, what are we asking for, and is there anything that we need to prepare for beforehand to make sure that we are, again, having a collaborative communication with each other? Because it is about making sure this individual is able to do things for themselves. So, framing disclosure professionally. Um, Many individuals who do have disclosure, like they talk about that there's a certain amount of vulnerability with it, especially for people who have maybe had previous experiences of people who have that autism or the bias that the hearing world is better, that there's like ADHD stigmas, being underestimated, having past discrimination based on disclosure. We don't say like you're silly for thinking that way. We validate that fear. That is absolutely valid to have those types of fears and to have those questions. But we need to reinforce that it is not just about telling them everything about your personal history. This is about creating conditions so that they can be successful, not justifying their worth. So how do we help? We need to identify those barriers. We need to translate those barriers into different support requests, like what are we asking for? We practice scripts. We practice how we're going to say it. We practice what their questions may be. We practice when they say, well, what's wrong with you? There ain't nothing wrong with me. But how do we professionally come back? Because those are situations that they may be put up against. And how do we, set them up for success by being able and being ready to have some of those that may be coming up to them? Um, so you decide when to do it. Like we don't show up on the first day maybe and say like, excuse me, I need you to do all of these things. Like we're going to talk about how do we talk to the employer? How are we going to bring it up? When is an appropriate time? And then understanding what their rights are, understanding, what they can do, what things are allowed for them. And that's where I really love in the previous slides, those different organizations, because they really have good information about how this works and more expertise, especially Jan, because they have a lot of scenarios and and literal scripts of like what you could say, how to, change it so that way it works for your situation and your scenario. Because there's not a one size fits all. It's that we have to we're working through this together. Um, so those are just some examples of how we're doing it. Like, shifting from that deficit, so I work best when. Could we try blank so I can do this better? And again, making up those scripts and finding a way to do it professionally, to do it in a way that everyone feels comfortable, and that sometimes we have to broach those harder subjects about people having that type of discrimination against our communities and how we're going to help them overcome that. So we don't have to push them to disclose. We just want to make sure that they have an informed decision if and or when they choose to decide to do that. So when barriers look like performance problems. So sometimes you'll have employers that see things like avoidance of assignments. They're switching between tasks without finishing them. They're missing those long-term deadlines. This is where, when we look back at executive function barriers, that's planning and prioritization. We're having difficulty breaking down those tasks. All the tasks feel equally urgent. I don't know what's the most important thing to start with. They all look important. And that overwhelming can lead to that shutdown. So these are some of those skill building strategies, again, like breaking them into those smaller visible steps. Say, we're going to only do these top 3 priorities every day. We're going to say, what are the top 3 things I need to get done? Now I have a way to know what I'm going to go to first. Maybe having somebody else, like your supervisor, ranking what needs to be done in what order. Like, they gave me 4 different things. Tell me what order you'd like me to do these in, because I have trouble being able to discern that. Going back to the lead source, going back to what they need. Um, Having those visual planning boards, those digital task reminders. There's lots of little things that are along the way. It really is shifting in how you're framing things to people and being like, no, I'm not being lazy. I'm having difficulty understanding where I need to start. So I need to ask, where would you like me to begin? Can you help me with this? That is a reasonable accommodation to get structure as to what their tasks are and what you would like to have done. So when employers see that they're having last minute completion of things, that they have chronic lateness, they have that deadline panic, this is, we're talking about time management. We're underestimating our task duration. We're missing deadlines. We're late to work. So this is, again, we're going to be building the skills. So when the employer sees this, or when we see it in an individual, there it goes. We will then say, okay, I can recognize that when I see these things, that I need to work on time management, or maybe that they need to look into time management and looking into what skills they're missing. What do we need to do to make this make sense, so that way it works for that person? Um, So when the employers see that there's a lot of tone shifts, that somebody's very defensive anytime they're giving a response, that maybe they're withdrawn or that they're shut down, this might be that emotional regulation where we're getting really not overreacting, but we're becoming very frustrated and we're not able to take feedback. So this is where we're going to go through it. And if we see that, if we're hearing employers say, like, they're very upsetty spaghetti all the time, you know, we need to work on that emotional regulation. What is it that we need to do? Is it practicing mindfulness? Is it fixing the environment? Is there something else happening? All that type of stuff. So it's, again, I just can't keep saying it over and over. I'm like, we're trying to shift what we're seeing. Like, these are kind of examples. When we're hearing this, what is it looking at? What are things that we can do? Because it's really hard to feel like you have control over something, especially like emotions, but there are things that we can do to try and help build that patience and mindfulness. So when the employer's starting to see miscommunications, that they're not being really efficient with their workflow, they're not making progress. What is this? Is this an organization issue? Is there a ton of clutter? I keep calling myself out. I hate this. Are they being really inconsistent? Are they having difficulty maintaining those routines? Like, What are those skills we're going to build? We're going to look for maybe standard procedures that they need to learn what the organization is of the environment that they're in. Maybe we need to have more explicit instruction of what that organization is. Maybe we need to make color-coded systems, or if you're my husband, we can't use color-coded systems. Like, so what are we going to use instead? Do we need to have a daily reset routine where, you need to like sometimes like I feel like it's at 2 o'clock for me that I'm just like, oh my God, I feel done. Well, I know I need to stand up. I need to take a 15-minute break. I need to do something to interrupt my routine so I can get back at it. That's what I need. We need them to introspect and see what do they need and how can we help them. So that's pretty much it. This is some of the resources on here. I know that I hope people were putting resources in chat. I know we had some other resources in there as well. But I guess at this time, I would ask, I don't know if there's any more questions, any more anythings. I don't know if I need to turn it back over to Rhonda or Amber.
I'm not seeing any questions right now, but let's take just a moment. Does anyone give you a moment if there's some things that you'd like to put in the chat? Or also, oh, I'm hearing this has been so informative. Will we receive a certificate of completion for this? If you complete, and so, Amber, I know I'm cutting into your area here. Yes, if you complete the evaluation, which we'll share the link in the chat in just a moment, you will be provided with a certificate of attendance. One thing I would love to share with you all, we have coming up, I don't know if any of you all are familiar, that we have what's called Transition Tuesdays for youth and adults. And this month, we're going to be talking about habits that hinder success preparing for post-secondary education and employment. We would love to have you all join us. And then also, too, we have the Bridging the Gap training in special education. And this is a series you can either join during the day or in the evening, whichever works best with your schedule. It really diving deep into the special education process. Everyone is welcome to any of the trainings. And just if you want to keep an eye out, I think on the next screen we have where you can, if you don't already receive and are on our list or to receive our e-news, we always will post and send out to everybody upcoming events. But that's a way to stay connected with us. So I'm going to, Amber, do you want to take over? And I'll look here in the chat to see
That's
if
absolutely
there's
fine,
any other.
Rhonda. Yep. We want to also remind everyone that Kentucky Spin, woohoo, so excited, just launched our Learning Center. And right now, available for free is our module set on Kentucky Transition 360 for parents. This is a fantastic opportunity for parents, caregivers, family members, professionals working with families to come in from a parent perspective and learn about all things transition related for young folks. Don't wait until your student is 17, about to be 18, to start learning terms and services needed and supports, because it will happen within the blink of an eye. Start early, even if you have a young person, because it comes before you know it. This is a fantastic opportunity. It is an at your own pace. We want you to come take full advantage of that. And we will be adding to our learning center soon. Our hopes, the next topic is going to be IEP basics to help prepare everyone with IEP special education services and how they can be supported through that. And Eileen, if you'll jump to the next screen for us. As you see here on the screen, there is a QR code. We've placed the evaluation link in the chat. We do ask that you take just a moment and fill that evaluation out. Your voice matters. We want to hear from you. What is meaningful to you? If you need further information on a topic, that is why we're here. I know we've said it over and over. We're not the experts on everything and we can't provide everything, but we sure can get you the right information and to the right person at any given time. So let us know your thoughts and let us help you. You will receive a certificate of attendance that is emailed directly to your inbox following the completion of that evaluation. And our contact information is here. We encourage you to reach out with any questions that you may have. We're here to support everyone. We also have tons and tons of resources available on our website. We have those infographics and worksheets. We also provide short clips and videos, recorded webinars. The information is always there and it is at your fingertips to be available for free. So once again, we thank you all for spending this time with us today. Eileen, you did a fantastic job. I've got to throw out there, they loved your upsetty spaghetti comment that won the chats today. So that was fantastic. We hope to see everyone back at our next event. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Kentucky Spin. We're here for you. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a fantastic day.